much. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? Nice, 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 nice. So I have about 10 minutes to quickly present about ACE. Awesome. Yeah, that's me. So re-engaging your app users. So let's do a bit of show of hands. Who here has a re-engagement strategy? Wow. Okay. Good. Good. So this is relevant. Nice. So let's talk about big numbers. Really, these are the really important ones. There we go, 50%. What we see is uplift in revenue of paying users who are retargeted. If we see a comparison here between new customers and returning customers, it's something that's been kind of true for the last probably, I'd say, 1,000 years. It's easier to make money on existing customers than new ones. Fairly simple. But in the app world, we try a little bit with a push notification. If it works, cool. If it doesn't work, it's fine. You know, it's 80% churn is okay, isn't it? I don't think so. We can do a little bit better. So a little bit about ACE campaigns. Basically, this is a super condensed version of it. Normally it'd be a 2-hour presentation, but I don't want to put anyone through this at the moment. All right, so how do we start with ACE campaigns? And essentially, this is just a quick kind of way of working with these. So choosing a landing page or a URL. So this could be an app link, universal link, or a custom scheme. Building an audience list. Who here builds audience lists as well? Nice. So at least we're looking at audience. So we try to understand the users, and that's really the main thing. You know, what types of users might be using your app, and then building an audience. So building an audience list. So usually we would say about more than 100,000 users in the list itself. Then a really important bit is building assets to engage the audience. So videos, images, text. This is where a lot of developers kind of get it wrong from time to time as well. They just think, oh, let's just use the same UA creative. And what usually happens is a user thinks, oh, well, this targeting is really off. It's the same ad. I already have the app. Why are you advertising to me again? If you do any online shopping, you can recognize a good remarketing campaign if your creative says, hey, you've forgotten something in your shopping cart. All right, just finish purchasing this product. Or we know you've looked at a mobile phone. So the creatives become relevant to users' behaviors. Same principle applies. Oh, we've seen that you've looked at a gems bundle, right? Here's a discount. Why not? Come back to the app. Because you tried re-engaging the user through your UX, and it just wasn't working. Here's a new way of trying to do that. Then basically that brings us naturally to deciding on a conversion event and your bid, basically. What do you want to achieve, right? So if it is a purchase, if it is just bringing users back, if you're trying to essentially plug a hole of churn, you know, in some cases, as the game is still developing, churn rate is a little bit too high. You can kind of use this to kind of plug the gap a little bit and try to figure out what happens if a user is brought back after, you know, 14, 30 days, etc. And then basically measuring success on Firebase or any attribution platform on top of that. So simple enough, right? Essentially, there's 3 kind of really good ways you essentially can build these audiences. So event-based audiences. So any of the attribution partners, you can use in-app events, starting from, you know, Firebase, Adjust Apps, Flyer, etc. Also audience builder. So lists created using GA for Firebase and Apps Flyer as well. That's in beta. Or also customer match lists. So essentially, if you have device IDs, and for app campaigns, it's device IDs only, those can also be uploaded. So if you have any first-party data, which is becoming a lot more important nowadays, it's something that you can plug into these campaigns. So usually, if I'd be working with advertisers on these solutions, they might have a static list that they'd be using, let's say 2-year-old static list, and then they try to mix in with a dynamic list as they're trying to acquire more users as the campaigns go on. And this one's a really nice kind of view here. I guess the truth of the matter is not all users are made equal, right? And you should also tailor your marketing and re-engagement strategy a little bit different. So here we have our kind of axis, which is monetization and then engagement. So essentially where we normally start with an ACE campaign is trying to get the inactive users in first. So inactive, but previous payers. So they're already taking that step of essentially trust. They've given you their money, right? But they've churned for one reason or another. That's a very simple audience to try to re-engage. And then payers about to lapse. So engaging users before they are lost. So either if you have a custom schema or if you're using any Firebase automated lists, basically saying, hey, these users will go. Try to figure out a way to keep them. If you can also then do any kind of in-game promotions or changes as well to try to keep these users in, that's going to help against high churn rate. And then we have active and payers, right? So high monetization, high engagement. And basically, this is just keeps increasing the activity and preventing churn, right? What else can we essentially do with these users that are already engaging with you? And then the last two ones would be inactive non-payers. So again, the main idea here would be getting users back into the app. So when we think about events, it is just even usage of the app itself, and then see if you can move them into the other quadrants. And then active and non-payers. And then here, yeah, it would be your heavy users. What can we do to actually get them to pay? Either if it is through really cool cinematic, custom landing page, or anything around that. And then if we think about it, how we can use the ACE campaigns essentially throughout the funnel, right? So starting from activation to monetizing the user, or cross-selling and upselling as well. If it is any any kind of different ways of monetizing here. So a lot of options. And yeah, I think that is it for ACE campaigns. Thank you very much for your time. Yeah. I'm not leaving. That's it. There we go. Super. I'm here. I still continue on. This is one of the rare occasions where I do my intro slide after I've talked 10 minutes. But let's go for it. So it's, I guess now it adds context. Some guy just walks up and talks about things. So who am I? I work for Google. Yes, gaming growth manager, been at Google for over 7 years. My experience has been with traditional media agencies and AAA titles as well before I joined the apps team. I've also worked for YouTube Gaming in my 20% project as a content analyst, launching YouTube Gaming. Now it's not, yeah, it's folded in YouTube generally. And also as Tiltbrush ambassador lead in EMEA. Tiltbrush was a virtual reality platform. They've open sourced it now, so I guess it's okay. I like hiking and cooking and going over time in my presentations. Hopefully not today. I'll try to keep it nice and short because I know I'm the only person that's keeping you from lunch. So I'll try not to take too much time. Cool, right. So the presentation theme, as you know, is creative testing in Google app campaigns. Is it even possible? Let's try to answer that question. Folks that I've been working with, they know my thoughts about this, but let's figure this out. So what we see now, and I hope it's not a surprise for anyone here, is that with machine learning and automation, your creatives become your main differentiator, right? And that's why we spend a lot of time. That's why a lot of the topics today are all about creatives, because the targeting is now taken care of for you, right? And that's really it. So if we look at kind of the percentage splits, it's 50–80% of your ROI comes from creatives itself. So how do you build on kind of creative success? Right. So there's 4 paths or 4 stages to it. First one, nice and simple, adopting best practices. So why is this important? So essentially, best practices would be when you launch, kind of covering all available asset formats, text, image, video, different orientations and sizes. For a Google App campaign, assets essentially determine what inventory you will access. Don't have a video asset, you're not going to really access video inventory. Especially we saw that, for example, iOS, very much heavy on video. If you don't have any specific types of assets, too bad. You're not going to enter in those auctions at all. And essentially then we start looking at catering creative to campaign types, trying multiple variations, creative themes. That's something that I talked in my previous presentation a few months ago in terms of the creative theming. And then, yeah, sometimes there's a question, what if I just ignore them? yeah, as I mentioned, you're not reaching the right inventory, the performance will also fall. I've had clients that just say to me, it's like, it's fine, we don't need landscape, it'll be okay. And then 2 weeks later, it's like, oh, the campaign's not working. And as much as I'd like to troubleshoot, or I open up a case with a troubleshooting team, the first answer is, hey, why don't they have the basics in place? Sorry, we can't really help you. And then we have that conversation of, hey, maybe you should add some more creatives. So really, really, really important. It eliminates any kind of possible mistakes that might be happening down the line. So how do we refine creative testing? I know, if there would be 100 people in the room, there'd be 100 different variations of how they do creative testing. So it is a kind of controversial topic. So I'm fully aware of that. So if there's disagreements, in thinking of the time, we'll chat about it during lunch, instead of shouting on stage back and forth. But essentially some expectations before creative testing. So spend will not be even for each ad group or each asset. That's really, really important to kind of keep in mind. Why is that happening? Even with kind of A/B tests, and sure, like A/B tests, very, very interesting, but there's something that everyone forgets about, and that usually is the auction, right? That's a big thing for us. So let's say if you have 2 assets and both get 1,000 clicks each, one asset might have entered only in 2,000 auctions, and the other one needed 1 million auctions to even try to get those 1,000 clicks themselves, right? So it's as those 2 assets are being compared, there's a big, big difference in terms of the quality of those assets themselves. It's something that's not necessarily visible, but it's important to keep in mind. So sometimes in cases where you have assets being added and one just isn't spending, it's already a signal that it's just not winning in auctions themselves. Then do not add new ad groups and creatives in the middle of the test. If needed, run a follow-up test after the test is done. It's just good testing. Like, don't mix things in and then try to make decisions based on that. Make sure you start with all ad groups concurrently from the beginning and keep bidding budget consistent during the whole testing period. Basics. I'd assume everyone should know this, but I think the main thing to really call out was the spend and why it might not be even. So there's 4 ways of running tests, at least some of the current setups. We'll kind of deep dive into the 3, which are going to be ABC. But basically, the test structure would be same number of specific formats across all ad groups. Creatives in each ad group should be built on different themes, different from each ad group. So those that I work with, they know I love theming ad groups and trying to figure out what works and what type of creatives will get the right user in. So let's go through the basics here. So evergreen campaigns. What does that mean? So essentially, it is the main benefit is testing assets in the right environment. So it could work for all bidding strategies. And how it works is adding to the existing ad groups or create a testing ad group with, let's say, 2-6 videos per week. And again, they should be similar type of assets. So orientation, duration, length, etc. And then the pros of this is you're testing in a real environment. All right, so it is just going to be an ad group in an existing campaign. So the bids and targeting should be exactly the same. Here, kind of the risk, I guess, in the cons is algorithm could be shifting spend to new assets and result in poor performance or performance decline. It's kind of assumes the worst right away. Maybe the assets will work really well, and then if it shifts all the spend to those, it'll be better. But it could be that essentially the existing campaigns can experience a change in the dynamic a little bit based on the new creatives. But this is kind of the easiest way where you focus on performance first. Just need that performance. You need those assets tested and viewed, and then you dynamically change things around. The second one is new campaign testing. Basically, the test structure usually is exactly the same. Same number of assets across all ad groups. But this kind of approach has two ways of doing it. So there's the new campaign, and we call it the double-edged sword approach. I did not come up with a name, but hey, we'll figure out the details here. But basically, the difference is here. If it's same geo, creating a new TCPI campaign, and then moving top assets to TCPA, TROAS campaigns. So essentially using a CPI as a kind of test bed, essentially. A lot more cheaper to do the tests. Problem is it's not a clean test, right? Because a CPI campaign is going to be focusing on totally different performance metrics. But here you're trying to figure out if perhaps click-through rates are higher for a specific type of creative, if install rates are really, really good. And the assumption is if some of those key metrics are better than the baseline, they should also work quite good for TROAS, TCPA campaigns. And the second one is, the Double-Edged Sword, which is a new testing campaign with, let's say, 10% of the Evergreen campaign's budget, and use kind of aggressive bidding just to see how it's going to work. Essentially, you're de-risking the Evergreen campaign, and if any changes happen, it's just 10% of the 10% of campaign budget you're kind of playing around with. Problems, there's cannibalization, potential cannibalization between the campaigns themselves, especially if you start looking at different bidding mechanisms. In cases where, folks that went through the TCPA to TROAS shift, those two are very drastically different types of bidding, and there sometimes could be a bit of conflict there. So let's look at some examples. So B1, which is the cheaper test with low cannibalization. So essentially, if we're looking at TCPI campaign, we have video 1, 2, and 3, and then we have the main campaign and TROAS. And what we see, for example, that video 1, we have our cost, we have cost per install and number of installs. And then for TROAS main campaign, we also see that kind of the ROAS, so conversion value over cost, is lower. And what we see is that, a sign of good correlation almost is more costly for an install usually brings a lower TROAS, essentially in this case, right? So limitation is, as I mentioned, CPI focus on installs, therefore, it's totally different optimization, and that the best performing CPI creatives might not be the same for TROAS as well. Second one, which is our double-edged sword approach. So we have our test campaign, which is TROAS. So let's say budget for this one would be $5K a day. And then we have our main campaign, which is $45K per day. Where a problem might happen is campaign with low budget might not be able to spend through assets, especially if it's limited by budget. So that's also one of the possibilities. And then if test campaign operates with less placements. So for example, if there is a limited set of, you get 1,000 searches a day, and if your campaign only has a certain budget, it's going to just dump 90% of the traffic through place search because it knows that there are searches, the IPMs are way higher, and it doesn't particularly need to worry about uncertainties like trying to drive traffic through YouTube, for example. Sure, the IPM might be a little bit lower, but then that would be expanding the inventory itself because the campaigns always operate on an average. Whatever the target is, it will use some networks to drive volume, other networks to drive efficiency to arrive at that midpoint. So essentially, there might be some limitations, but this is also a good way of de-risking the main campaigns themselves. So something to try out and see if it works or not. Then the third one is correlated geo campaign kind of testing structure. I'm starting to see these a little bit more, but this is highly kind of client specific. And essentially what you're looking at is using another geo where top performing assets and themes correlates for higher budget campaigns, i.e. Brazil learnings to US. So essentially you're de-risking the campaign in totally different market. As some people might kind of know here, the results might also not carry over. So this is very, very specific for kind of each company and client. I've heard in some cases that companies use Ireland as a base for US to try to figure out if things work in Ireland because it's a smaller market, because UK would already be quite large enough. For some clients it worked, for others it didn't necessarily work. So this is really, really dependent on your own kind of research and if you can find any kind of correlations between geos and creative performances. So those are kind of the three main ways of looking at potential testing. Basically, when we finalize creative testing, when campaign matures, there's two main things to really kind of keep in mind. And this is, to be honest, for creative testing and also just general campaign performance. Running a test at least one full iteration of the selected in-app events conversion window before analyzing test results. This is extremely, extremely important for TROAS campaigns as well, because you set the target on the conversion window. So the campaign, that's all it kind of really cares. It's like if it's a day 14 target, it's gonna then look at it at day 14. So if you start making changes after day 3, In some cases, I've had people try to make changes after day one. It's not how the system necessarily works. And then, yeah, so running creatives for 7 to 14 days, essentially, it allows kind of go through the learning phase, essentially, and allows to kind of figure out when the system is stabilizing. Because there, especially if you're running new campaigns, you'll usually notice the initial over delivery, under delivery, and then it starts stabilizing. That's in a lot of cases that seems to be the usual behavior of some of the campaigns and some geos. This brings us to kind of, I guess, motivation-based creatives. I always want to throw this in. When you build creatives, add in, well, figure out who you're building them for. That's also a really, really important bit. I know in yesterday's networking event as well, there was a lot of conversation about, who's actually playing the games? Why are they interested? Why will they click on your ads? Why will they even pay if they have to? So I've been talking about this for the last 2 years, and I still will. This is kind of one of the strongest kind of indicators that I see when we plan UA campaigns and also when we plan brand campaigns as well. So it helps us understand what the users are thinking. So next one is iOS. Has anyone figured out creative testing on iOS? Okay, the only hands going up for the phones. Perfect. So essentially, no one's really figured it out. So two potential ways of looking at this. So first one is using Android as a sandbox. Sure, the users might be a little bit different, but how different are we? If a user pays €1,000 for your in-game items on Android, probably is going to be some similarities on iOS as well. A good team would then do a bit of user research and see if there's similar behavioral patterns between those users, and then try to kind of understand if there's going to be learnings that we can move from one platform into another. And essentially, it's just a faster way of testing. And the second one is basically testing the iOS environment, which is clean setup with restricted number of videos and kind of number of ad groups. And let's see how the structure is in the next slide, which is pretty much exactly what we kind of looked at. The option one, which was your Evergreen campaign. You have your 3 to 4 ad groups with different text assets, matches with the video themes. You set aggressive competitive bids. As you know, if you're running on iOS, especially with the conversion delays, the bids usually need to be a little bit higher. And then after those 2 to 5 days, they stabilize. In terms of daily budgets as well, this is quite an interesting one here. So aggregating campaigns and 10 to 20x your TCPA. Interesting caveat here is divided by ATT consent rate. That also kind of helps a little bit with the measurement. So you need to figure out what the consent rates are on average, and it just helps to figure out a little bit better how the system thinks and what data it sees. Because if it doesn't see any data, the performance is going to be lower. And then essentially the analysis is optimizing ad groups, themes, assets on the existing campaign. So same kind of principle we were talking about a little bit earlier. Model conversions are key, as you can't analyze creative performance based on scan. And then, wait for modeling delays. And then optimization point is just matching the right types of motivation texts with video assets and iterate. That seems to be the kind of the easiest way at the moment to do something that resembles a kind of a clean test here. So the last bit, okay, I'm okay with time-ish almost, but these are the last bits here. Measurement and optimization. And essentially, and this is something that I mentioned in the previous conversation as well, but I'm still seeing some crazy situations where creative teams now are responsible for TROAS drops and increases. So usually it's the drops, never the increases. But we need to kind of split out the metrics. So there's 3 ways of looking at it. There's scale, install efficiency, and post-install efficiency, essentially. So what does each asset brings to the table, right? And how do you determine the impact? So perhaps impressions are really good for a specific asset that just actually starts driving volume. It is winning auctions. You are starting to compete at a larger scale. Then is the ad appealing, right? Is the asset or an ad getting clicks or clicks to installs, right? Is the ad relevant as well to the users? And that's how we arrive at the IPM. And then, of course, we have the post-install efficiency. So when you work with your art teams, also try to kind of figure out, what you're actually testing for. I've heard way too many comments from our teams saying, "Hey, the conversion rate's really bad," or users pay rate is really really low, and everyone just dumps the problem into the asset team and the art team. No one would ever go to, let's say, production team and say, "Hey, our ads click-through rate's really bad. What can you do about it?" The production team would say, "No, that's not our problem." So it's also important. The further you go into down the funnel, a lot more teams are impacting the end result, right? In some cases, I've had situations where when we deal with a client, we looked at the benchmarks. They're actually really, really good at benchmarks, and then either we suddenly start going 20, 30% above benchmark, or we maybe reach a focus on improving monetization to a bit higher level, right? So it's important to understand where the potential is. Very rarely you'd be hitting significantly above benchmarks unless you're doing something super, super innovative. So it's important to understand where the problem is by analyzing each of these creatives and assets. Another point to make, ad strength, and essentially it is a qualitative measure of ads effectiveness based on number and types of assets included in the ad group itself. What I mentioned earlier, if you have the assets, you can actually then enter auctions themselves, right? Fairly simple. It doesn't necessarily look at is the asset good or bad, or what's the click-through rate and those kind of things, but essentially it just helps you kind of figure out all the basics. Why is it important? Essentially, better ad strength is positively correlated with increase in impressions and interactions. I know this is a super, super small font here. I should have increased it a little bit. But basically, moving from poor to average in terms of the ad strength score means about a 10% increase in impressions and about 43% increase in interactions themselves, right? And then we kind of slowly start moving up. So between good and excellent, we're looking at 12% increase in interactions themselves. So if your ad group asset strength is poor, that's going to be the easiest way now if you solve for that to increase the interaction metrics and the scale of the campaigns as well. Does anyone know off the top of their head what's your average ad strength? Oh, yes. Okay, so you said you're having poor ad score, sorry, or no? Okay. Okay, so it's a mix, but yeah. But basically, it's really, really important you keep an eye on this. And if you're looking for improvements, this is an easy way of seeing it. So, quick kind of logic flow in terms of when to implement a change. Kind of detailed, but essentially, has the asset been given time to ramp up? Right? Is it out of learning state and has it been serving for 8+ days? If it's not, then it's probably not a good candidate for replacement. If it has, is the asset performing poorly? Here's like some little things that you can check. Is it rated low? Is the asset CPA higher than the average for its format, for example, as well? And what's the performance for 14+ days? If all of those or some of those are true, then yeah, that's probably a good candidate for replacement itself. So have a bit of a system, essentially, when you're looking at assets as well. And then also a reminder is taking conversion delays into account when assessing asset performance. Then asset level reporting, and essentially it's just looking at the right things here. So for TCPI campaigns, IPM matters quite a lot, right? So video 1 here, so IPM, we have 7.12. That's a really key metric for an install campaign, all right? But if we're looking at TCPA campaign, which is actions per milli, would matter a bit more. So in this case, actually the second asset, which is video 2, would work quite well here at 3.54. And then usually our conversion value cost is usually the main KPI for advertisers as well. But we already see that there are quite a bit of a difference between other metrics as well. And then, so basically ROAS and APM matters most in TROAS campaigns as well. So, if you're running a TROAS campaign and you have an asset that has a really good IPM, it's like, sure, but is it actually, generating events? And sure, you can go, a step further and start looking at player metrics. And is our RPU also higher for users from TROAS campaigns versus TCPI campaigns, et cetera, et cetera. But always a good thing to add in is just custom columns. IPM, so installs per milli, so installs times 1,000 divided by impressions. And then APM is the same kind of logic there. It's just a good custom column to have as well in your accounts. And then the main thing is refresh rate to avoid burnout. So yeah, after running creative for some time, its effectiveness decreases. I think that's also not a surprise for anyone. How long it takes, that's the big difference, right? I've seen in some cases creatives that are built for Halloween keep on till March for some sort of reason. People are still clicking. So, and it differentiates for, client by client. It also differentiates by market. Bless you. So, if you have a market of 2 million people and average on a week, you reach 60-70% of the possible market, probably everyone's gonna be seeing your ads at one point as well, right? So compare that to a 250 million market where, it'll take you a year to actually reach majority of those users. So keep that in mind as well. And do have a look, because some cases where we see a campaign normally works good and suddenly it starts kind of decreasing. Very often the IPMs, we see the IPMs start to go down, key ad metrics decrease, and that's just gonna increase the cost themselves as well. And that's it. Wow. Thank you very much.
I think we can take like maybe 2 questions before like we going to lunch. And we would like to,
just a short question. When you're adding like different assets, different ad groups and different creatives in these groups, like to one campaign many times, and then after that you see like you analyze 10 or 15 ad groups, you will see like at least 5 underperforming groups, but still bringing something in, like 1% of users and so on. What is the good practice to just shut down these ad groups, turn them off, and and how many should we remove? How you approach this problem?
Yeah, super question. So it depends also on the campaign size. So what the kind of the usual budget is. If it is at like 1 to 1.5K a day, that would be something like 3 to 4 ad groups we normally see. And then you'd eliminate maybe 1 after a month, but it really is highly dependent. Usually we look at the assets and ad groups in relation to the average, right? There's going to be assets and ad groups that will be really good for efficiency. There's going to be assets and ad groups that will be really good for scale. Ideally, you want both, high efficiency, high scale, but usually you'll see one or the other. And then the ones that are low scale, low efficiency, those will be the first ones to go, because the likelihood of them actually, impacting the overall campaign positively is super, super low. So I would get rid of those first. So yeah, and keep the structure a little bit, to keep it chill. Don't add in 20 ad groups on like a $500 a day campaign, because it's going to be, $10, $20 in each. The campaign will take half a year to figure out what actually works for each ad group itself as well.
Great, thanks.
Thanks.
One more if we have. Okay, if not, then like I think everyone is hungry, so let's have the lunch now. We have 1 hour for that.